You who I don't know, I am Nell Derick Debevoise. This or that somewhere on your screen is the fabulous Jeff Lee, who I'm thrilled to be here with. Um, so we're celebrating a number of things today. Jeff's fabulousness and courage, first of all. And secondly, the book that I wrote called Going First, Find the Courage to Lead Purposefully and Inspire Action, which feels like such a group collaborative effort for all of y'all, all of us, all the CEOs I've been talking to and others about this moment and needing to just step up. And, you know, you might have noticed a lot of what we're doing hasn't been working, it turns out, for people and planet. And so I'm super excited to be around such an amazing group of folks who have the courage to imagine a different world and to do things differently, which can be hard, right? Inertia is really powerful. So that's just a teeny bit about me. More importantly, I'm going to turn it over to Jeff for an intro now. Then we'll do a quick grounding and then we'll get into the meat of it. But Jeff, give us your who are you?
Yeah, no, hi, I'm Jeff. It's great to see you all again, friendly faces. I should say by way of background, my family comes from Vietnam originally. They were boat people, landed in California. I showed up, which was great. So that's why I sound like a Californian. But my parents and family live in Southern Georgia, which is why they sound like Southern Georgians, which is, again, Asians with Southern drawls is pretty funny. I wish they were on here today, actually. But, by way of background, my career sort of taken me in public policy and politics and, the state, local, federal, international, spheres, as well as the private sector where I'm in tech now. So previously at VMware running their 50 states and Canada politics work. And then now at a startup called Rhino that works in sort of the fintech, insurtech, prop tech, housing space, right? So that's sort of the arc, sort of going private, public to private, private to public. And now I'm here with you today. So I'm looking forward to chatting with y'all.
So awesome, Jeff. Thank you. Yeah, I think that crossing of sectors has actually been coming up a lot. I think a lot of folks who have an understanding of public policy or not-for-profit and, that social impact work as well as private sector, that's just so powerful. So love that you illustrate that. Love that Ezzy is here just in time for our little grounding. So this is a bit of a me, Nell thing, an Inspiring Capital, my company thing, and by the way, a neuroscience thing. So before we dive in, we are actually going to just ground and show up so that we can be as present as possible in the middle of all the things that y'all are doing today, this week, this month, all the things that you have in your head, and really be present to learn and hear and be open. So bear with me. If you're driving or anything not safe, please just keep driving. But for the rest of you, hey, Kelly, give a little bit of a jiggle, shake out the stress in your shoulders. I imagine some of us have that shimmy in your seat a little bit. Roll maybe. And then as you get some of the jiggles out, come to stillness. Get your feet solidly on the ground under you, the earth under whatever is between you and it. Get your butt solidly in whatever seat you're sitting in. And then as you're comfortable, either avert or close your eyes. I promise I won't share this part of the recording. And just take some deep breaths, maybe the deepest you've taken today or in a few hours. And I want you to think about a time when you stepped out on a ledge, when you went first in some way, whether that was starting a company or asking a hard question or having your first kid or having your kid get sick for the first time or changing industry and starting a new job or trying to be vegetarian for a week or eating a meatless Monday, right? Personal, professional, major or small. Think of some first. And once you have that story in mind, just replay the moment a little bit. Keep breathing and just replay all the feelings. The excitement, the pride, the fear, the disappointment when it didn't go quite as you hoped. The gratitude for everyone who got you there. the uncertainty about how it would turn out. The eagerness to do something first again. And with a few final breaths, just thank yourself for having done that, for having had the courage. And then thank someone around you, a partner, a friend, a colleague, a spouse, a kid, a stranger who helped you get to that point. And finally, just shine a big round of gratitude to the world, the people and planet, all the things out there around you who made that all possible. And with one final deep breath of gratitude, you can come back as you're ready to the group. Awesome. Thank you for playing. To those of you who are here, hopefully that sets us up for a really fun, present, engaged time hearing all about Jeff. So a bunch of people just joined us from the waiting room after our mindfulness start. So as a quick recap, I'm Nell Derick Debevoise, author of Going First, Find the Courage to Lead Purposefully and Inspire Action. Thrilled to be here with my colleague from the US-Japan Leadership Program, Jeff Lee, most recently author of a really cool viral piece about being Asian in US politics, and building on a long and successful career back and forth between the public and private sectors, being a purposeful leader. And so we're going to dive in. Jeff, share with us your latest and greatest story of going first.
Sure. Thanks so much, Nell. Thanks everyone making time over lunch or over breakfast, depending where you are, or dinner. I know some of you are overseas. I would preface and say it's more, going first seems like such a bold thing. And for me, it's probably more like finally going first. We're so blessed and there's so many leaders on, in this conversation. And, for so long, I had sort of felt like I was deeply reluctant to really speak out. And that's cultural programming, right? I mean, I was raised in a family of Vietnamese immigrants who were really focused on survive, right? So it was about not rocking the boat. It was about not expressing yourself. It was about sort of going along to get along so you can get your place in society. And the idea was that, if you sort of were a good soldier and you sort of just, were polite and quietly did your thing, you'd get to belong to the club. Right. And I think that was really tested in the last year or so during COVID-19 and the pandemic, where there was so much, scapegoating in the Asian American Pacific Islander community. Right. And that's why I'm so happy to speak with you all today for Asian American Pacific Islander Heritage Month, which I will tell you in my entire life was not a month that was important to me until what happened last year. And so I'm going to sort of share with you really, I think, 2 chapters of how we got to where we are now. And the first is what I'll talk about, which is last year. I think some of you might have read, I was on my last work trip before the pandemic ended, and a woman went up to me and spit on my face and told me to go back to where I came from. I don't think she meant California or DC, right? To be specific. I think she meant much further away, right? And I'll tell you, that's not the first time that's ever happened to me. So actually, there's sort of a programming you have of sort of shake it off and, get on the plane, because I was, going on a work trip. I needed to get to my meeting. And also, frankly, if you do elevate things, the first thing you think about is if, law enforcement or other come in, will I be killed? And I know, I don't think many people think about Asians in that way, but I certainly have had enough experiences to know that people don't take my word particularly seriously in a me versus you, us versus them situation. It's just not what you picture, right? And that's historical, that's a variety of factors, right? So that event really shook me, because that was sort of the beginning of the COVID-19 Kung flu, China virus, Wuhan thing, right? And I'll tell you, being Vietnamese American, I can understand why there's some historical, unique challenges with China, but in this instance, being lumped together just because of how you look was pretty interesting. So that's sort of one event, right? The second event that year was, my parents, have been running this free range organic chicken farm in Georgia for over 20 years and built this community of friends and business partners and, just a real place of home. And what a lot of people don't know is when the outbreak happened, actually Southern Georgia was one of the key centers. They had 5 of the largest death rates per county in the country in March and April. And that was not too far from where my parents were. And later that year, it became pretty clear that it wasn't going away. And some of their business partners sort of told them like, hey, we think you're okay, but we can't really associate with you anymore because you're the reason why we had this virus. Right. And I will tell you, my parents are really tough, like your classic immigrant story, right? Like salt of the earth, work your tail off, right? Just trying to, fulfill the American dream, which I would define as letting your kids choose whatever the heck they want to do in safety. Right. I mean, they, escaped communism and having their farm collectivized, their family went to prisons, never came out. They were trying to escape that to give us an opportunity. Yeah. And to hear them on the phone tell me this, I mean, I think hearing that vulnerability, these are 2 people that are not the type to share their feelings, but to even hear it was enough for me to realize that's something to be said or done. And that really sort of started this actualization that, hey, I needed to write something, say something, right? And so I decided, okay, I was going to write a little op-ed thing. I'd never written for public consumption before. In politics, you're sort of, it's all about supporting your principal, your boss, right? But never in my own voice, right? And so I was going to write my local little paper, the Albany Herald, about, readership of, 25, 30,000. And I had a piece about what immigrants do to contribute to the American economy, to American society, and particularly in COVID-19, whether that's, immigrants in small business, immigrants serving, rural hospital and medical needs that aren't being fulfilled, immigrants who are supporting research and development, which then created this vaccine that we have. Now it's on the backbones of immigrants and, proud community members, right? So that piece went out. This was the end of August. And to my surprise, right, my parents received a number of apologies. And I think, number one, like I just thought, wait, who actually reads? Who actually reads these days? So it was really kind of refreshing to know that actually something can have an impact. But also just sort of this feeling that actually you could make a difference. So I started writing over the course of the summer and the fall, and then heading into 2021. This is sort of the back half of this, which was this horrible shooting and murders of Asian American Pacific Islander women in Atlanta. My sister lives in Atlanta, right, not too far from some of these spas, and it wasn't just the horror of this sort of this tragedy, but it was the lead up of these very notable, very visible viral videos of grandmas being beaten up by strangers, right? Asian women, generally speaking, and then some of them fighting back, right? It was a very notable, powerful thing. But actually there were a lot of just cold-blooded murders, stabbings, this sort of thing. And these are in places that are very cosmopolitan, right? New York, San Francisco. These are not normal. This is not what I would describe as sort of closed-minded circuits, right? Not like a monolithic sort of community thing. This was a very unique, diverse interspace. But it was the crush of messages I got from friends and loved ones, colleagues, strangers. I got about 800 text messages or notes from people asking me, "Hey, Jeff, what should I do?" And I got to tell you, my response was, I didn't realize, number one, I was people's Asian friend, if I were to be honest. And I think, most people who know me, I don't think of me as Asian as one of the first things they describe. I think they describe me in other ways, good or not good. But it was really interesting to sort of see people connecting the dots between this community of people having these horrible things happen to them and people not feeling like they have avenues or tools to sort of be a part of supporting this group. And I think in light of, George Floyd and other horrible tragedies and, in the social justice conversation we've had in the last 2 years, overlaying with this COVID-19 discussion, I think it was very apparent, or at least on the forefront of a lot of folks' minds. What I thought was powerful with those messages, I mean, it wasn't just white friends feeling bad, which there were a lot of those, and thank you. Allyship's important.
Sorry.
But it was also the most apathetic Asian people I know who only care about 3 things, okay? They care about the mortgage payment, they care about the career ladder, and they care about their kids' education. So stereotypical, but totally that way. And it was those people now that were saying, what can I do? Where can I donate money? What should I be reading? Who should I talk to? Should I write letters? That was very different. And that's when the realization came that I needed to say something. So this is the finally going first part, right? And this is sort of the
Okay,
long way
yeah.
of getting there, right?
No,
And
I
so
love it.
that's, yeah, and that's where it got to the point of like, okay, if I were to tell all of us what we would do, I would say, hey, we should be focusing on diversity in the media. How do we cover these issues? We can talk about hate crime policy and making sure we can really provide substantive quality government service delivery to meet people where they actually are, and make it very clear that Asian Americans aren't some monolithic block that you picture as doctors or McKinsey consultants, right? It's just so important and powerful. And then also to say, actually, within the community ourselves, we need to take ownership and actually be active, because only you can be your best advocate, and you have to bet on yourself. And that's in your everyday life,
Yeah.
not just the big milestone parts, but the microaggressions. And I will say this last point before we sort of carry on. I wanted to highlight that spitting incident last year, not because spitting is like a horrible thing, which it sucks.
I
It's
mean,
that,
not a microaggression, like kind of a big thing. Like
yeah, it was
spitting on
aggressive,
another
aggressive,
human is pretty over the top.
aggressive, right? It was a subhuman thing, right? But
Yeah.
the issue is not the spitting on. The issue is the conditions that allow for someone to get spit on and for everyone to set up pretend like nothing happened. That is the thing you fight against, right? And that was sort of this driver in terms of how I'm active now speaking on these issues, why we're talking about these things today, and why you're seeing a real awakening in the Asian American Pacific Islander community of people saying, no, we're going to be very vocal and active. And this is for a group of people that have been conditioned their entire lives to be quiet, right? To go along to get along. And now suddenly they're all chatting. Okay. And part of that's generational, right?
Yeah.
Part of that is sort of this recognition and, ease of opportunity to be able to speak in social media. But I think part of it too is sort of people feeling like they realize they're not white either. And I think that was a really important sort of distinction. There are some folks that are still trying to convince themselves they are, but I think it's pretty clear what you see here that very, very much the other.
Yeah. And so before we go, I have to hear one thing. What happened? So you're in the airport, this woman spits on you.
Mm-hmm.
Who was around and what happened right then in that moment?
Yeah, there were about a dozen people looking around, just trying to like get, buy their food before they go on their tiny, puddle jumper flight out of Reno.
Right.
And everyone just looked at me and then looked away and then walked away. That's what happened. And I really, really want to believe that any of us on here would have said something or like, created a conversation out of this.
Yeah.
But again, these conditions and these sort of cultural structures are very powerful.
Yeah.
And I think there's something to sort of realize that, it's not necessarily an individual thing, right? It's a larger systemic issue.
Totally. So thank you. And I want to really encourage people. Obviously, this is a friendly and intimate crowd, lots of USJLP in the labs and in the room, some inspiring capital folks and others coming here. Please jump in on chat if you're having questions that you want to get to. Jeff and I have a whole, I think our agenda could take us 90 or 120 minutes or something. We'll let you go by one of the latest, but please jump in. So if you're having questions or comments along the way, absolutely welcome that. My next question is, as we talked about, Jeff, give us a rose and then a thorn of this going first specifically, not either of the antecedent events that led you to do it, but, from this incredible outreach that you've had to speaking up, what has been a beautiful and then a hard thing?
Yeah, I mean, in terms of the roses, right? If we were sniffing the roses, I think one thing is I am seeing a bit of a halo effect where, friends, family, loved ones, friends of friends of friends are all telling their story. And I mean, that's something that when you write something, you sort of assume you'll get barely a blip, right? And then you just move on to lunch or dinner and that's it, it's over. But I think when you really sort of lay out something that you've been wanting to say, something that you're scared to say and then finally do, I think people sense that. And so much of this dialogue and discussion needs to be awareness, right? This is Asian American Pacific Islanders are invisible people until they're not invisible, right? Like you are great and you're a wonderful colleague until you're not. It's totally arbitrary. It's totally conditional based on what other people feel about you in that moment, right? And this is sort of why this active empowerment part is so important. So the roses of that is hearing from thousands of people reaching out. It's not what you anticipate, and I will tell you, it's been on the other side of, in terms of hearing people's stories and tales. I mean, speaking with young people, I try to speak to, high schools daily. Like I speak to a high school a day, and the questions I get are from people, they very clearly, I'll just tell you now, who have never talked to another Asian in like public engagement ever. And there's at least one young person who's sort of, it's an emotional moment. And that's not something you anticipate feeling or sort of delineating or realizing maybe you were a part of this sort of self-actualization, the feeling that I wish I had when I was younger, right? This sort of, this constant search for mentorship or community or, this feeling of validation, which I will tell you, I never really found. And that's something I struggle with constantly. And I'm sure many of us on here do too. The thorn about it is how overwhelming that is, the pressure that comes with that. I mean, when you have 6,000 notes in from people, they expect you to have the answers of some sort. And I just gotta tell you, I don't have multiple silver bullets, right? There's a couple werewolves. I don't have enough silver bullets for all the werewolves, right? There's just some things that I believe to be true that, that if you don't believe in yourself, no one else will. That this is a group that is collectively very powerful, that can learn from a lot of other amazing groups, amazing leaders, that we need to invest in the individual, sort of, especially as you sort of talk about political representation and political power. But I'll tell you, like, it was sleepless nights, like trying to respond to messages felt like throwing a message in the bottle to the ocean. You throw one in, there'd be 30 back. That was overwhelming. And I felt this deep responsibility. It definitely affects your home life, having sort of this elephant, right? Knowing what that responsibility is. And I'll just tell you, that part's really hard. But that's part of the responsibility I think you have once you sort of speak publicly. There, you do have a responsibility to sort of continue to share thoughts and really encourage other people to speak. And ideally, we would all be sort of stage managers, right? Ideally, we would set a stage, make sure it's just right, have the right microphone so that other people can speak up and tell their stories, particularly Asian American Pacific Islander women who have been disproportionately affected, disproportionately trashed on, disproportionately attacked and murdered. That is sort of the space that, in an ideal world, I would love to be able to help do a little part in creating in, but it definitely has a personal toll.
Yeah. Thank you so much for the honesty. I know we've talked about that. Yeah, it's hard at home, right? It's one thing to work a lot, right? And that obviously can be hard on a relationship, right? To feel unavailable or to be pulled by this thing. But when you're, as you have told me over these weeks in talking, stepping into yourself, right? Not your professional self, not your gov relations, not your chief of staff kind of professional self, which is also you, but your deepest identity, genetic self publicly. And for the world to want a piece of that, that's a whole different level in the relationship, right? So I appreciate you sharing that, because I think that's super real, right? This going first thing is not about like starting a new policy at the office and being the CEO who brought in an inclusive hiring strategy. It's like showing up as you, maybe to do the inclusive hiring practice, but it's much more personal than that. So I appreciate you speaking to that. Maybe related or not, but the next thing we wanted to get to was what was surprising. So the good, the bad. What's been surprising to you?
I think the surprising part is I still feel this tremendous guilt to do more. I'll tell you, I kind of thought, okay, I'd feel a little better, but actually I didn't feel that. I didn't feel that like natural charge, and I still feel, just candidly, this weight that comes with that. That was a real surprise, because you kind of think you finally get to tell like what you've been wanting to say, right? And like you're in the part of this movement of all these amazing people talking about, Asian American Pacific Islanders and history and cultural anthropology and sort of, gender intersectionality, having these incredible, powerful stories. And you're like, okay, I'm going to tell mine in politics, which most people don't even think of Asians in politics, right? Like we're not even captured in survey data in the ways that you would expect, right? I mean, we're usually in the other bucket. That's the way it works, right? So you don't really exist. So okay, I'm going to exist. And then you exist and you kind of think you're going to have that relief, and actually you don't. I think that was a bit of a surprise, to be candid with you. And I think the other surprise to that was, actually I didn't, for this particular piece, I got very little disagreement mail, as I like to say. I got very little hate mail. I will tell you what I was expecting was more hate mail. And I will say most of the negative feedback I have gotten from other pieces have mainly come from Vietnamese Americans, which is like its own like curveball, right? You kind of think, okay, I'm finally embracing the heritage I've been running away from my entire life. And actually the people who are like really think I'm a scumbag is actually people I share heritage with. Like that is crushing. And that's been really tough.
Yeah.
There's really nothing more disappointing than feeling that, I'll just tell you, especially when you finally have kind of overcome the hump.
Yeah.
But the truth is, like, these are folks who still believe in the purity of a meritocracy. They're the folks that really believe that if they can do it, anybody can do it. They really believe that I'm a socialist as a result of believing in, challenging these structures we're a part of. That's hard to hear. And obviously the effect of that on my parents, who from an older generation, they get even more hate stuff as a result because their son is doing this, right? So there's also that sense of guilt. So to be candid with you, it hasn't all been roses. It's been more thorns than I'd prefer. I wouldn't change it for a second, but I think that's the unique challenge of sort of finally going first is just, prepare yourself that, sometimes when you jump out of the airplane, you better double check that there's a parachute, right?
Yeah. Yeah. And someone loving holding the cord.
Yeah.
So talk about timing. Why was this the time? Was there something that made you feel safer or bolder, or was it just external conditions?
No, there wasn't. I think it was at a boiling point, right? And I was, again, I was reading all these great pieces, but nobody had really ever talked about Asian Americans as a true political force or block. And if you looked at the recent election outcomes, right, in 2020, and then the special election in Georgia in January of this year, which, by the way, that was January this year. That was like 10,000 years ago for people, I'm sure. But that was a really unique difference maker.
Yeah.
And I think that, to be honest, like other communities of color and other allies, I think we're starting to see that. But I'll tell you that Asians weren't. I don't think they were connecting one and one together. So like you're in this really unique moment, right? Where, recently the Asian American Foundation, which is an organization that's sort of trying to position itself as the NAACP for Asians, if I use that terminology, raised $125 million, right? So this is a true like awakening, right? I mean, if you think about like civic engagement, right? It's sort of the grassroots people power, right? It's sort of having really thoughtful strategic policy discussions. And then it's the money, right? Those three things are just incredibly powerful. No, that gives you the microphone to be taken seriously.
Yeah.
And now, I expect you to see a lot more Asian Americans in the sort of professional pipeline. But, for me, I think the sort of the epiphany of like, you had to do something, I think really came from three aspects. The first is it's so easy to be angry in the life that I think I've had. The strength of sort of empathy and perspective is a much more powerful long-term tool that's really powerful. The second thing is this sort of actualization that the more you can embrace yourself and the community around you, you're actually a more whole self, right? The sort of, you talk about that work, right? Like bring your whole self to work, like this sort of thing, right? There is something very important about that, in terms of you feeling comfortable in your own skin. Yeah. Right. And that third thing is this realization that we have an opportunity, a responsibility, an obligation to lift others and, give folks the opportunity to speak. Right. And what I tell young people in particular, like the four most powerful words I can think of is, the phrase, I believe in you. Right. That's something, or like, I'm here for you, or I know what you go through. These things are just very, these are things that these are young people or community members that have never heard that before, ever, right? And so I think those sort of actualizations and realizations was enough to sort of tip the scale over and really be more active and more public.
Love that. So you've alluded a little bit to it, but we wanted to cover, what will you do differently next time you go first, or as you continue now this journey of speaking up, speaking out?
Oh my gosh. I think you would have to get buy-in from family and loved ones first before you do something kind of crazy. That's
Interesting. Yeah.
highly recommend that
Mhm.
first and foremost, right? I think helping to baseline with your closest friends and family and loved ones
Yeah.
why this matters to you and why it's not easy, but you still do it. I think that is actually really important. And I think that's anything you sort of find a calling for is sort of explaining to somebody why it means so much to you, that why it's integral to not just your happiness or your sense of self, but this feeling like you're actually moving the needle in these big, complicated structural things, right? The other thing I would say, in terms of investing time and energy, frankly, I wish I had had, I had asked for more help.
Mm,
I wish I'd asked for more help early, right? I
mhm.
wish I had talked to historians who can connect me with people. I wish I, had talked to my parents more about sharing more parts of their story. I wish, I had promoted more training opportunities so that people couldn't be bystanders, right? I wish that, we had set up more links to support Asian American small businesses that got completely crushed during this pandemic and still get crushed because of vandalism, right? Like you're still seeing that. You're not seeing this like everything is okay tail yet. That's not happening, by the way. In the Chinatowns, Little Japans, Koreatowns, Little Manilas, you're not seeing that yet. So it's like an interesting economic issue that you're in. I wish, I wish I had set up more of a pipeline for young people and, partnering in terms of mentorship, right? And golly, I wish I had raised more money. So there's a lot of shoulda, woulda, couldas, but these are things that I think could be applied very much in this year and heading into midterm elections. I think Asian Americans have a unique opportunity to put their thumb on the scale, right? I mean, Asian Americans make up 6% of the country. Most of these races will be decided. The ones that matter will be decided by far fewer than that. And obviously, putting in gerrymandering and other things aside, this is a group of people that are not used to being communicated to. So they're kind of wide open. They might have certain leanings, but as I told you from my community, Vietnamese Americans, they tend to be more conservative leaning. And so there is sort of this up for grabsness in this unique moment where I think so much of our policymakers, so much of our leaders, should be at least meeting folks where they are. And I think there's an opportunity here to really amplify and support these communities in a serious way.
Yeah, totally. And I think that's such an interesting reveal about that, not niche, but that kind of profile of people who were reaching out, right? Were those formerly apathetic Asians, right? And it seems to me like, the power of you going first, right? That it wasn't an activist or a politician or someone who's been out there kind of beating this drum for a long time, but you sort of coming out of the woodwork with a very serious set of credentials behind you seems like a really powerful catalyst for a group like that. Do you think that's right?
Yeah, and I think anyone who had met me would have known that I would have rather lit my hair on fire than speak publicly, right? Like, I mean, so much when you have a staffer mentality, it's like getting talking points to let your boss be a star, right? And actually, you kind of shun that, like you would rather be the behind the scenes person to let the actor actress do their thing on stage, right? Very rarely do any of these folks actually want to be on the stage too. And I would say the ones who really, really want to be on the stage, I would not exactly be super enthused about having them there because, power and that sort of thing, right? But yeah, that's what I would say as a reaction. I think it was a unique opportunity, and I wasn't seeing other folks speaking up, particularly in politics. And now you're seeing more of that. So I think that's been a good catalyst. But I'll gladly answer questions or, let's open it up to folks. I'm sure they have.
Yeah, I just nudged folks for that. I think that illustration is exactly right. It's, that's the going first, is that by doing something that you were really well prepared to do, not necessarily excited about it, but you had all the skills and wherewithal that it took to do it really well, despite all these things you want to do better. That opens so much, right? It does. It opens the door, and then people can come through because it's a little less scary, or those high school kids are going to know they can do it all the way along. And yeah, could not agree more, Linda, that we need more constructive speaking up. It is so powerful. That was one of our kind of more meta questions. And so while we wait for other folks to chime in, please do push Jeff, ask anything that's on your mind. Okay, yeah, go ahead. That's a good concrete question. Kevin, so Jeff, are you partnering with certain organizations to speak to the high schools, or is that just on your own initiative?
No, sadly, I wish I had systems and processes, but it's from the thousands of emails that I've been still going through.
Yeah.
And so I'll, speak to the principal or other, and we'll sort of get a sense of what they want to talk about and why. And usually, like where I get to yes in doing it is they'll talk about some of their students, and maybe they've just never had an Asian American
Mm.
speaker before. Actually, there's some of these classes that have never had one in the last year. So to me, I find that shocking. But then if you take a step back, you're like, oh yeah, that's right. Because, why would people want to hear what an Asian person thinks? So there's a little bit of like, oh yeah, that makes sense. So I wish I was more systematic about it. Some things have come up a little more holistically, but
Mm.
it's still, I will admit, sort of onesie twosie still. And I think, based on sort of their interests, being able to speak to form, and, sometimes as much as, 1,000 students are at a time, right? And so
So great.
there's an opportunity to amplify, which I think is important.
Yeah. Yeah. It's a powerful touch point for folks, for kids, right? That's, as you said, to have that, I believe in you, or just seeing what they could become is really powerful change driver. So it kind of goes to Linda's point, and something that we had wanted to talk about was how does this idea of going first, right, or stepping up or stepping out or stepping into your identity, however people want to frame that, how does that lead us to a more inclusive, anti-racist, and sustainable way of working and living? Because that's where I want to be.
Well, I think first off, I think if you can create conditions where people can embrace who they actually are, that is something that will, I think, make us a much stronger, more durable, more resilient society and culture, right? The incentives that I had in my personal life, in politics, in my day-to-day interactions was really for many years, to downplay my Asianness, right? My heritage. You'd let the jokes slide by, while you're eating like dim sum or amazing food, right? Because us Asians, we love our good food, but you would let the jokes go because you sort of just knew, like, it wasn't personal. It was just sort of part of the cost of being here, right? Cumulatively, I think it hurts a little. And so I would just say, I think just this sort of self-awareness, frankly, about understanding that what you do say does matter. So words do matter, right? And then, of course, the actions that come with that is important. So when you have a political environment that incentivizes certain words, which then causes certain actions, which then allows for, in San Francisco a couple of days ago, right? I mean, someone with a military grade knife stabbing 2 women on a bus that I would take, right? So, this is not some onesie twosie thing. This is really a systemic aspect. And it's really about, again, getting back to this point of creating conditions and speaking up. And for many folks on here, I mean, who maybe don't identify as Asian Americans or Asians in general, you have such a unique power and voice. And I cannot tell you enough just how much power you have just for existing. Like, you have such unique treasures and gifts that your voice actually does lend strength to others and creates a space for people to feel like they belong here, that they're not foreign, right? I mean, this United States has a history of systematically and legally distinguishing you as an other by not allowing you to have citizenship, by not allowing you to bring families over here, by not allowing you to, I don't know, actually live your life during a world war, for example, right? We weren't exactly interning German and Italian Americans, right? And in public service in particular, you would think that the great diversity of the United States is our strength. It's our economic competitive juice. It's this magical strength and uniqueness, unlike many other places in the world, right? And you look at who represents us overseas and diplomatically. And so you have a national security apparatus that goes, okay, you can serve our country. But wait, if you're Asian, we don't want you working on the Korean Peninsula. Never mind that, we've got, never mind that should I be skeptical about Irish Americans working in Ireland, right? Right. But you don't think that, like, I mean, when we just mentioned this, when we're just talking, you sort of think, oh yeah, that's like really silly. But then the second thing is like, wait, how did I not see that? And I think that's like the extra layer, because I hear this from progressive, open-minded,
Yeah.
active, passionate
Yeah.
community leaders who, it kind of just comes and goes, it washes by. And I think, again, that's the point of sort of where, you and I, we have a responsibility to sort of highlight these inequities and these false equivalences.
Yeah. And the invisibility of not you, the people, but the bias, right? Of our bias, my bias as a white woman, not knowing or seeing that. Dig in a little bit more. So I think what you said, that all the incentives you had were to downplay your Asianness. So you mentioned one thing of the jokes, right? But I think it's super powerful to get really granular. Like, tell us more. Like, what other things might we still be invisible to? Where else do those incentives to Asian yourself come?
Yeah, I'll give you an example, right? And it's sort of the classic like model minority thing, right? But
Yeah.
there's a sort of I have been affiliated with certain organizations and companies that will not put Asian Americans as a minority, for example, because there's just so many of you. And so therefore you're good, right? Never mind that you're not making it to the C-suite. Never mind that you're not going to make name partner at the law firm. Never mind that maybe your investment opportunities might not be the same. And never mind that you're going to have a bias for not having an anglicized name through the algorithmic reader. Never mind all that. Never mind that you'll probably have less access to mentorship. Never mind that they're going to give you feedback that's contradictory, right? The phrase that I heard regularly was lacked executive presence, right? And that's just code for you're not Ken to Barbie kind of thing. That if I were to be candid, that's not what people picture. And so I think so much of the the way we sort of look at like Asianness actually is like the more you lean into that, the less you are all those things, right? So your incentives are completely misaligned. So actually, it's more about up leveling your credentials and your check boxes. So then that makes you non-threatening enough. It makes you white enough. It makes you worthy enough. And those are just the everyday examples that I can think of in your professional life, right? I mean, part of the reason why some of us met was really a quiet pursuit to find professional development or community that I never, ever thought I could find or deserve. And I think it's hard. And it's, I'll be honest, it still is not an easy thing. This is why we need to have leaders like everyone on here reach out to other young people, let people know why you're investing in them, right? So there are opportunities to flip that over. But in the meantime, the incentive, the model minority thing, which is you Asians, you're so quantitative, you know how to dig in the data, but you're not actually a leader. Like that's always the implicit tone. And I will tell you during this anti-hate conversation, I had friends at certain companies, they would get an email about one subject. And at the end of the email, it would say, hey, oh, by the way, hate towards Asians, that really sucks. That's really horrible. I mean, I'm paraphrasing, but you get my drift. At the end of an email about something else.
Right.
Let me just posit the question for you. If another group or another community had, acts of violence or acts of discrimination very publicly happen, do you think a company would send a separate email about those groups?
I mean, we've seen so many, right?
Yeah,
The incredible spike in Black Lives Matter support.
of
Not that it
course.
isn't problematic or performative, but nonetheless, people are ticking the box at the very least.
I mean, Nell, we have organizations that won't even give Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders their own email. And that's like,
Yeah.
that's how serious this is, right? Now, there's opportunities of progress. If if you're an iOS user, if you have an iPhone, on your phone on May 1st, it said Asian American Pacific Islander Month, Heritage Month. That did not exist a few years ago. So
Yeah.
there is sort of little things of sort of just weaving in this visibility. And I
Yeah.
know it's sort of minor, small things, but
Mhm.
it's those minor, small things which will allow people to feel the confidence and the space to celebrate
Yeah.
the heritage and the backstory and the communities they're a part of.
Yeah. And what about the tick box? I mean, that does seem like such an important thing, right? If you're not even letting Asian Americans speak up and identify as Asian American in your company census. So inform me, I'm ignorant about that. How pervasive or not is that? Like what proportion of companies would you say are
Yeah,
tracking?
yeah. I mean, so I would say this, right? The conversation about Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders for sort of just basic data, basic
Mm,
understanding of where people are is a complex conversation, right?
sure.
And the reason why it's so important, you hear this phrase data disaggregation. The reason why it's so important is because people are all lumped together. right, in this because it's 6%.
Yeah.
And then based on being lumped together, it has certain numbers and metrics. You're like, and as a summary, you're like, oh, they're doing great. We're good. But right, if you dig in just a little bit, you'll find that there are certain communities that, yes, do have higher education graduation rates, that have the opportunities to, have, larger salaries, right? But if you dig into some of these more newer American groups, right, Vietnamese American being a great example, their economic opportunities, their graduation rates from high school and college, their quality of life, particularly as it relates to their life expectancy, their experiences in the criminal justice system are probably on par, in some ways worse than maybe other groups that you would have pictured as having some of these challenges, right? So just breaking that up is important. The reason why in the company standpoint that's important, or an organization, is it's sort of the same thing, which is you're saying, oh, well, we have all these, we're good. And actually, that is not the case. It's not about numbers. It's about how they play a role in the organization, right? So if you have a lot of busy bees, but none of these busy bees become, king, queen bees, they ain't owning no hive, right? Where's the honey there, right? Totally. Is what I would say, right? So actually, this bamboo ceiling, we don't really hear or see, but it is a real thing. I mean, and I know like women and other communities have definitely talked about this issue. That is certainly very apparent. And I'll say specifically in tech, think about it this way. I want you to picture who is in the background doing some of this stuff, right? We talk about some of these stereotypes about these groups being so quantitative, so creative, so scientific. So actually, a lot of these companies do have a quiet, either large minority of Asian Americans, or even a quiet majority. So I want you, and then when you add in colleagues from other countries, that number definitely becomes a majority. So I just want you to think about it. There's Asian hates. You have a larger Asian constituency within these companies. And then where is the action? Now you're seeing some of it. But I would argue probably not as much as you would see if it were another moment where we are.
Thank you so much. Just the tip of the iceberg, so much to do. So as we reach the top of the hour, I think Debbie's question is actually a really beautiful one to close on, which is, how do you stay animated for the fight, and how can we better support you and each other in doing the same?
Oh my gosh. I mean, I want to tell you wine would help. So I will gladly take beverages.
Red, white, rosé. What's your, do you like a full-bodied California cab, or?
I'm an all of the above person, right? No, I think, so much of it is actually like, encouraging folks to do things of substance, right? The call to action, right? What we talked about. I mean, one thing I tell young people, and I would tell all you, is like, learn the history. I'm sure many of you haven't been in an Asian American class, right? I mean, it's not exactly a requirement in school, but PBS has an amazing series on Asian Americans. Highly recommend. I mean, everyone has something to learn, right? The second thing is, whether it's sharing your story or encouraging someone else to share their story, that has a way of amplifying things, right? The third thing, right? If you don't want to be one of those people that watch me get spit on in the airport, not do anything, there are trainings that you can do, right? Asian Americans Advancing Justice is a great bystander training, right? Holla Back, another great group, right? So powerful, right? The mentorship part, right? I mean, not doing it because it's some token thing to do, but doing that because you really believe in the theory of change. And the last thing, you can donate with your feet, right? You can go to a restaurant, you could order takeout, you can give to a group, right? It doesn't necessarily have to be some Asian American umbrella, right? But giving to other groups that have so much, so much to give right now. I mean, there are many other community members, that are being great allies. And I think in this sort of social justice movement, you're seeing that connectivity that is really powerful. Continuing to invest in that. Read the authors, learn the stories, make time, check it out, read your book. Those things you can do for me.
Yeah. I love it. Awesome. Linda, I know you had a question. We have to wrap at 5 of, but we can probably nail it in our final 2 minutes. What did you want to ask, Jeff?
Technical. I see that this is being recorded, and I wanted to ask, where can we find it afterwards? I know my husband would love to be present. He's in a Zoom on the second floor.
As we all are. Well, that's a perfect question to end on. I'm so glad I got to you. So follow Jeff. I just put Jeff's Twitter in the chat. Follow him. And I'm guessing will share out what we have there. Check out my book is this link here. And if you do that, that's a quick way to get the bonuses and get on my list where you'll also get this. And if you want an even more direct way, I just put my email out and I'm super happy to just send the full recording to you personally for your husband and anyone else you know. You are a total inspiration. Well put, Megan and Francis. So welcome. Thank you for being here. Thank you guys all. Kelly, thank you so much for, as always, championing the USJLP crowd and love. Really fun to see fellows known and not, as well as all the other folks. So Jeff, thank you. What inspiration. Keep it up. We'll send you some wine.
Thank you so much. And thank you all for investing in the time and taking the time to be a part of this conversation. And I'm looking forward to just amazing parts of progress that we're going to have together. Thank you.
Yeah. Good to see everyone. Be well. Peace.